And welcome, friends, to the Cross Country Cycling Advocacy Call for January 2026. Uh, Today, we have Rob McGonagle from the Bicycle Training Collective Canada, based in Toronto, who's agreed to join the call and present on some really important work that he's leading as part of this collective to help elevate the the role of bike mechanics and help bring more people into this really important trade so that we can help get more Canadians on
Mhm.
bikes, reliable, safe bikes, affordably. So, Rob, why don't you go ahead?
Well, thank you very much, Samuel. And it's a pleasure to be here and presenting to people from across Canada in the cycling community. Um, I'm not really in the cycling community. My background is actually the green industries. Okay, and I've had a full career. Okay, supporting various green industries in Canada. Most of this work came about from the work that I was doing at the City of Toronto, starting in the pandemic when we started looking at the cycling industry in Toronto, and we started identifying numerous challenges to grow it to meet the objectives of the City of Toronto's climate change plan. I'll get into that in a second. What I'm going to be doing is really focusing on the work that's currently underway to build capacity for oops. Let me just move this out so it doesn't interfere with me. Okay. For servicing bikes in Canada and also to develop kind of that profession of bike mechanics, which has not been given much respect in Canada. Um, and just to start off with, to understand what bicycles are, okay, at a very high level, it is a clean technology. It's part of the climate change and environmental solutions that are being developed around the world. The challenge in Canada is bicycles aren't on the federal list of clean technologies, and that creates a lot of challenges, which I'll get into a little bit later. But it gets back into this bicycles don't get a respect in Canada. Bicycles are also changing quite dramatically from 40 years ago. There's increasing use in technology in bikes. We're also starting to see that bicycle becoming a micromobility sector with a whole range of different technologies. And I think we're starting to see a blend of transportation vehicles, you know, throughout the entire vehicle ecosystem, we'll say. For example, where does a bicycle end and a motorcycle start? Where does a motorcycle end? Okay, and a car starts. One of the things that we're looking at is that because of this complexity that's building in the technology, that you need more skills to properly service these vehicles. And the question, that I've always posed is, has the training kept up with the change in technology? The other thing we want to look at is, well, what's the potential for jobs in the industry? If we're going to be expanding the use of cycling, in Canada and specifically in my case in Toronto, what is the opportunity for jobs in that market? So under Toronto's climate plan, we had some very specific cycling targets. So economic development, which I was leading, okay, in the green sector, we started looking at, well, what does this actually mean? Okay, so you can see, the data is not great in Canada on the amount of trips that are done, in an urban area. But our last recording was done in 2016, where we averaged about 5 trips per person per year, okay, between that 1 to 5 kilometer range. Our target, though, was pretty aggressive. Okay, we wanted to see that grow significantly. Um, and that looked really daunting until we started comparing to some of the best practices around the world. For example, Paris. Okay, when we looked at the growth rate that we were looking at and compared to what's been happening in Paris, well, Paris is already, 1/4 of the way towards our target on a per person basis. So that market growth, okay, translates, okay, to a really big number. It's got to increase by 4,800%. that sounds daunting, but if you look at the compound annual growth rate, it's 21%. Still daunting, okay, but there's lots of technologies that have grown at 21% per year. What really is kind of blowing when we did this analysis was looking at the number of bike mechanics are needed, if we were to meet that target. So currently, this was done in 2023. Okay, we estimated there was about 200 bike mechanics in Toronto. To meet that demand by 2040, if we were to become a cycling city, we were estimating around 7,000 to 8,000 bike mechanics in the city of Toronto itself. So pretty impressive growth. Okay. And that's a fairly good industry just looking at that one type of profession. The other thing, and this became very prevalent during the pandemic. Okay, there was a shortage of bikes, but there was also a shortage of people to actually fix the bikes. People were taking their bikes out of garages that they hadn't used for years and taking to the bike shops. The bike shops couldn't handle it because they didn't have the skilled settings. And this is an issue that's not just happening in Toronto or in Canada, it's a global issue. And in part because bikes are becoming more prevalent as an urban mode of transportation. People are using their bikes now more than just for recreation or sport. It's a urban mode of transportation, and they need reliable vehicles, and they're not necessarily into fixing it themselves. So we don't have the data, but there was a general consensus when we've talked to people in the industry that there's a shortage of okay, workers, period, but there's also a shortage of the skills for those workers. And there's no formal workforce training. So the current situation in Canada, when it comes to the occupation of bike mechanics, there's limited training. We did identify 10 organizations across Canada. They're all generally private organizations offering 2 to 3 classes a year, maybe 6 people in the class, but there's no standardization of the training. There's no certification of the people coming out of the training, and there's no accreditation of the trainers. If it's a skilled work, then you do need that training in the in the workplace as well. That's called apprenticeship. Okay, and any of the skilled trades has an apprenticeship program. No programs in Canada as well. And compounding all this was the fact that there's no industry organization that can actually take the lead on developing training for the industry. Some of the issues we identified, bike mechanics are not listed as a skilled trade by any province. Okay. Though if you look at what the skilled trades are in each province, they include hairstylists. In Ontario, it's actually horse harness makers are actually a skilled trade, but bike mechanics aren't. Okay. And then we start talking to the provinces as well. You don't have any proof. How many bike mechanics are there? Are you listed in what's called the National Occupation Classification System? All this stuff, there's a lack of data that's out there, and it prevented getting engagement both in academic institutions who might offer training, but also involvement in federal funding and provincial funding to get support, okay, to develop training. And everything revolved that first question whenever we talk to a stakeholder to talk about training is, well, how many bike mechanics are out there? Okay. And the answer is always, we don't know. And this is where the importance of the National Occupation Classification System, or NOCS for short, okay, becomes real critical. It's what collects the data, okay, on every occupation in Canada. About 4,000 occupations are listed in it, about 40,000 job titles. When we started looking a couple years ago about this issue, Canada was the only one, okay, reviewed, okay, that didn't list bike mechanics or bicycle repairers or bicycle technicians in our national classification system. We are there as a job title under other repairers and servicers, but that doesn't give us the detailed data that we're looking at. And why does that collection data matter? Well, without employment data, okay, you don't have the information on how many people are hired per year, how many people are employed per year, what are the hiring criteria, what are your salaries? And that employment data is needed to engage training organizations to develop the training, qualify for government support, and also, just as importantly, to provide guidance to employers about competitive wages. If there's no listing of what your competitor is paying your worker, you tend to go cheap. Okay. And this has shown repeatedly that wages are very low when there's no data, okay, about what the competition is. The other important thing is being listed as an occupation is needed to be considered as a skilled trade. So that's your next step. Once you get listed as an occupation, then you got to be talking about how do you become a skilled trade. So our step one, which we undertook last spring, okay, was a submission to the Employment and Social Development Canada, who looks after the NOx standard, to get listed in the standard. It comes out every 5 years. The next one was coming out in 2026, so we figured, if we started a year beforehand. Um, Unfortunately, okay, we had no success in connecting with government staff until we did some advocacy. And actually, through the Minister of Employment and Social Development, we were actually meet with government officials in October. That's when we were informed that the deadline had passed. It actually had passed in early 2024, not on their website. Um, and the deadline for the 2031 revision is 2028. So we're working for the 2031 revision right now. Okay. But what was interesting is the government officials were really intrigued. They had not even considered bike mechanics. Okay. And then they started doing some basic information. It's like, yeah, well, there is kind of a fair amount of people out there. It is important for an industry. So we're actually been working with them. We're having regular meetings now with government officials in Stats Canada, Employment and Social Development, actually develop the process, okay, to get included in both the NOx, but more importantly, to start collecting the data that the NOx normally would draw. They believe that we can get this data without being listed. So we do have some preliminary numbers, which I'll share with you people shortly. So the outcome of the advocacy in the spring, and I hope people had signed that petition, and the petition is still live because we're going to be pushing it for the next 2 years, is that there's been establishment of a small national working group to look at these issues. The feds have given us access to the job bank data. So we've actually started looking at what are the hiring practices for the industry. And right now we're working with the feds on the definition of job names of bike mechanics and also the skill sets. This will allow Stats Canada to pull out employment data through the national census. Um, and I'm getting a little bit techie here, okay, but I love numbers and statistics. And the job data, okay, really provides a very effective snapshot on hiring practices in the industry. Now, this comes from when a company posts their jobs on a web-based job board, such as Workopolis, Indeed, or the Canada Job Bank. Okay. It's important to note that it doesn't reflect all jobs, though. It's only those people that are posting jobs on a job board. So it doesn't really reflect the true size of the industry, but it does give us some good indication. So, for example, where are the jobs being, hired in Canada for bike mechanics? Well, we can see, from this, okay, that, British Columbia, okay, is by far the highest demand for using the job board for hiring bike mechanics, followed by Quebec, Ontario, and then, to me, I was surprised, Alberta. And that typically is about 150 to 200 hirings per year. Not surprising, the industry starts ramping up in the wintertime. Okay, so the job postings actually peak in January, okay, with people likely expected to be hired in February or March, just in time for that peak season. There does get a little bit of a jump in May. I suspect that what's happening there is, people are doing really good. They're short staff, and it's like I got to get more staff for the rest of the year. And the important thing for the industry is what is the average wages, okay, of the hiring. So we can actually see the whole range, okay, from, posted minimum rates, okay, to posted high rates. It's been slowly going up per year. It averages around $23 an hour. Not great, okay, as the average. But when we looked at really high qualified people, okay, it starts getting into the range of 30 to $35, and in extreme range, it's up to almost $40 an hour. So we're getting a little bit of data. Okay. So that's great. Okay. So we know there's a training need. What are the best practices in training bike mechanics? Well, we've started doing a review of training in 10 countries plus Canada. Not all are listed here. Okay. And we looked at the government role, what level of government is involved, who certifies the training completion, what sort of regulation licensing status is out there. This report, by the way, will be published. Okay, we're hoping to publish it late spring, early summer. Okay, once we've had some review done by each country. Right now, the research is just based on web. We want to actually talk to each country just to verify what we're hearing. The one thing we found, excuse me, is every country deals with it very differently. Okay, it's in some cases, there's a heavy government involvement. Some it's purely done by the industry. Others, such as in Japan, it's a hybrid body with industry and government representation. So there's a lot of interesting best practices that are out there, okay, and different models that we could follow. We did do then kind of a ranking of what we call the professionalization of the bike mechanic training of countries. And from what we were seeing, okay, we felt that France, okay, seemed to have the best professionally process, okay, but it's highly regulated, and there's a huge amount of government involvement, and that may not be an appropriate model in Canada. There are other models. Obviously US is something that's natural, but US is actually quite behind, just like in Canada. Okay. They've only started recently a apprenticeship classification. Okay. It's not considered a skilled trade. There's a lot of challenges because like Canada, it's done at a state level. So down there, you've got 50 states, you got 50-day ways of approaching it. So this is something that'll be useful going forward. But one of the things we're finding is like this is like done by not the industry. This has been done by kind of a number of people who are enthusiastic about the training or what have you. So the things we're looking at for next steps is to formalize a national working group on training. So we're open to engaging new members. We're really interested in bringing people in the industry into this because it's going to be the industry that provides that direction. Um, we'll be looking at undertaking a national survey to understand industry workforce issues. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay. But that's going to be a really critical guide to how we move forward because we want the industry to provide that direction. We did identify a number of different training organizations across Canada, but there's no collaboration. There's very little linkages. So we're going to build that collaboration across Canada. And because we consider this a skilled trade, it does require an apprenticeship. Okay, so we are looking at piloting a small work integrated learning program in Toronto. That will be a start of an apprenticeship type program. So you have the classroom training that's being offered right now, but then you go from classroom to an internship or an apprenticeship, okay, with trained dealers who have mentors that can help these young bike mechanics, okay, become more professional. And then we've got medium term and we've got some, long term thinking that we're thinking. I won't get into that, but I mean, those are things that we've got to be thinking about strategically. So we did the first step, which was, try to get listed in the NOx, okay, to start getting the data. Okay. Now what we need to do is understand what the industry challenges are and what are the issues and how do they want them to be resolved. And that challenge is limited data, no industry trade association. So the result is little documentation, as we mentioned. Interesting, Shimano Europe has undertaken a survey. It was announced in the spring of 2026 called the Next Gen Mechanics Initiative. Their report is going to be released in spring 2026. We've been having some really good discussions with Shimano Europe on this. Okay, and they've been sharing some of their best practices, what sort of information they've been collecting. So the question was opportunities to do a similar survey in Canada. And I'm quite pleased to announce today that we actually have a major distributor that has agreed to sponsor the survey. And this will be all announced in the next couple of weeks. It'll help provide a valuable information on the needs of the industry. And we'll be talking to, when we're talking about doing the survey will be for obviously the employers. We want the employer's perspective, but also for the bike mechanics or in the industry to get an understanding what training they require, what were the challenges that they face. Because this is a call in for advocacy. It's like, well, what can cycling advocates do in Toronto or in Canada? Okay, I think the advocacy and awareness building is really critical. There's a really needed early step is getting those bike mechanics listed as an occupation. So we're keeping the petition live, okay, for the next year and a half. Okay, we've got about 1,000 signatures now. Ideally would love to get it into the tens of thousands of signatures. Okay. But it's kind of a geeky issue, right? Okay. Getting it listed. But that's a first step, get it in there because once we get that listed and the data, then the next thing is getting bike mechanics listed as a skilled trade in the provinces. So that's one of the questions that local people should be asking is why aren't bike mechanics considered a skilled trade in our province? And the report, which will show that bike mechanics are considered a skilled trade around the world, should help that. Um, Building industry training into micromobility strategies and advocacy is a really important element. Okay. There is the infrastructure, it's a critical element. Okay. But we also have to have that skilled workforce that looks after the bikes that are going to be using all that infrastructure. The other issue, building, in talking to decision makers is why aren't bikes considered a clean technology in Canada? To me, I think that's one of the biggest misses that the cycling stakeholders have missed. Okay, is it's not officially considered a green technology. Um, if you've got a background in training or industry, contact me to get involved. We're looking for more members to help this coalition. Okay, develop and develop the training. If you're already in the industry, the things you can do if you're an employer of bike mechanics, okay, then the next time you're hiring, okay, start talking to your local training organizations. Okay, they're out there, okay, and they're graduating students. Okay, look at graduating, or hiring some young bike mechanics that have gone through some training, and act as a mentor for these new bike mechanics and build that capacity. Because if we're going to build up an industry or the use of cycling in Canada, then you're going to need a much stronger industry. How's my time? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I was trying to keep it around 20 minutes, so a little bit over, but I'll mention I do have resources. Okay. All those things I reference, okay, with the data and stuff like that, they're all in these reports.
Thank you so much, Rob, for this presentation. Despite the challenges, you've managed to bring together a lot of data on this topic. And if we're successful, there'll be a lot more data in the future.
Yep.
I have Dave, the bike guy, Dave in Ottawa, who helped share this presentation on Facebook, and there was an interesting comment on one of the groups he posted it on that I think um, I would want to share with you, where somebody was basically saying, what's wrong with the status quo? I'm a bike mechanic, or my buddy's a bike mechanic,
Yep.
and he learned from, from informal mentorship
Hmm.
and continues to learn. And why do we need to formalize this profession? And so, and I'm sure you've encountered that question. And so my question, Rob, what's your elevator pitch as to why the status quo is not working?
Because there's not enough trained, we'll say mentors, okay, that do this informally. We need to ramp up the hiring process. Okay, if the growth of the use of bikes as a method of mobility becomes a really important thing, okay, you're going to need a lot more people in the industry, and that's not going to be able to be done properly, okay, by kind of training informally. The other thing is bikes are becoming much more complicated and complex. If you start including e-bikes, okay, in that, and those require a little bit more skill, okay, to fix, and there becomes liability issues because without the training, okay, then if you didn't fix a bike properly and someone got killed because of mechanical problem, okay, after the bike was looked after, that bike company has a liability issue.
And what's in it for the workers, often young people who are going into this trade?
I think it opens up kind of the opportunity of looking at bikes, the bike industry as a viable occupation. And this is what we hear about all the time, okay, is because it's all informal, okay, people don't think of this as an occupation that they want to spend, their career at. They don't understand what are the pathways, okay, to go from a junior bike, a salesperson, a bike mechanic, into, a bike shop manager, or shop manager, into get.
You muted yourself, Rob.
Sorry about that. I think you know, there's opportunities for workforce attraction when you have a training program, okay, and more formalized. And that's one of the things we've been hearing, or I hear repeatedly from the industry, is it's really hard to get someone to come into the industry.
Thank you. That's a great way to boil it down. Laura in Calgary made a couple questions. I don't know if Laura, if
Mhm.
you want to unmute and share your questions.
Sure, I can do that. So I worked in the sporting goods industry and was kind of around when sort of the National Bike Show went the way of the dodo, and
ETAC, yep,
the Sporting Goods Association failed for a range of reasons as well.
yep.
Um, and I mean, part of we could go on about sort of the problems of some of those industry associations, but
Mhm.
I'm wondering what impact that might have on moving this forward. And if this is maybe one of the reasons why it hasn't moved forward, is that there is no, oh, hang on, I got a thousand things happening at once. Um, if there isn't, if that's a problem. And then my other question is sort of how the retailers respond to this,
Mhm.
because the minute you talk about increasing qualifications, then they're adding to their costs.
Yep.
And it's interesting. Over the past couple of years, I have looked to hire a couple of different bike mechanics,
Mhm.
and they are very difficult to find and very the quality of work is all over the map,
Yeah.
especially with bike refurbishment, which is the bulk of what we
Yep.
do. So we are very interested, want to support this.
Mhm.
Over the last year, sort of 18 months, we've refurbished about 1,200 bikes and given them away
Mhm.
in Calgary.
Mhm.
So the scale is there.
Mhm.
Um, Bikes are full of, the landfills are full of bikes,
Yep.
and it's something that's really needed. Bike ownership levels among teenagers in Canada is remarkably low. And a lot of the bike refurbishment work that happens in cities is sending them overseas. And
Yeah.
again, I I'm like, well, wait, what about here? And
Yeah.
again, I look at that as being part, all of those things are tied up into this,
Yeah.
right? In my mind, in a
Yep.
way. So yeah, so I'm just curious on the retailer front, and just I will shoot you a note, Rob. Would love to
Mhm.
be part of
Perfect.
however we can help you
Mhm.
on this front. Um, we don't train mechanics, but we sure um, we start kids off with the idea that they might want to work in the industry, and we teach
Mhm.
them how to ride a bike and then how to just generally maintain their own. So I think our programs are a source of
Yep.
people. I mean, I do think you need to have the passion for bikes before you get the passions for the mechanics of it
Definitely.
in my mind. Um, okay, I'll shut up. Thanks.
No, you definitely articulate a lot of the challenges, lack of an industry organization. Okay. Why don't we have an industry organization? Okay. I have looked at the kind of the history, okay, and the failures. Okay.
I can tell you about some of those.
Oh no, okay. But it's like, okay, like if it's a different world now, right? Okay. I mean, bikes are being used not just for sporting and recreation. Okay. It's a serious vehicle. Okay. And if we're talking about having an industry, participate in the economy in Canada, okay, which bikes are, okay, more and more, okay, then you need someone to represent the industry as a whole. Right. Now, there is the American, what's the National Bike
Dealers
Dealers
Association.
Association, okay, and they're kind of active in Canada. Okay, that's a viable, that could be a viable solution, but yeah, and it's not for me to say, okay, but it's like there needs to be an organization. Okay, we're dealing with just the training, but the training has to fit into what the industry requires. And similarly, like there is resistance, okay, with a lot of people about professionalizing the workforce, okay, because that does increase cost. But that's the reality, right? These bikes are not cheap anymore. Okay, it used to be bikes, you could buy, well, you can still buy them at Canadian Tire, okay, for under $500, but your bikes nowadays are getting $1,000 to $2,000, and your repair at least, okay, and your repairs, are going up each year.
And
So yeah.
there's an argument to be made that professionalizing bike shops can actually bring in some more efficiency, that the management of the jobs can be smoother and they can actually bring in more
Pirates,
revenue
can you
that
hear
way.
me?
Exactly. And I was going to just, that's an excellent point, because we hear this all the time.
I'm
One of the
multitasking.
big costs, okay, for bike shops, okay, is this having to train, the time that the owner has to train a new bike mechanic, okay, and the bike mechanic only, sticks around for a couple of years. So it's like, okay, well, how do you get your bike mechanics to stick around longer? Right. Okay.
I had Zvi had your hand up earlier.
Yeah.
You still have something to share?
Yes, I had a question. Well, first of all, this is really amazing work you're doing, Rob. I
Thank you.
I think it's a hugely important topic.
Mhm.
Um, Sam said that you're aware of what Cyclochrome in Quebec is doing.
Yes.
Like,
So
and
we're
I
working very closely with them.
so one of the things which I think is really interesting in the model here in Quebec is that they are intertwined basically with our bike share system.
Yes.
And so there's like a standardized product that people learn on. A lot of bikes, like there's over 10,000 bikes in
Yep.
the Bixie fleet. And so it actually creates synergies to like help the bike share fleet be maintained. And they also work with the police department's bike
Yep.
fleet as well, which is a few thousand bikes.
Yeah.
So like I think that model where you have a certain degree of standardization
Hmm.
and it also like can create spin-offs just like getting more people involved, like bigger bike share systems in general in
Yep.
different places and getting people interested in cycling. And I think it's really presented as a trade. Like people like they're going after people who didn't finish high school
Yes.
and they're teaching them a valuable skill. And so they're not necessarily bike geeks ahead of time.
Hmm.
And we also do have a similar a fairly diverse ecosystem in recycling bikes and things like that,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
have been around for a while. Unfortunately, one of the bigger companies that did this went bankrupt. But I think like the combination with the bike share systems, I
Hmm.
think has a lot of potential to create synergies basically everywhere.
Yeah.
And
Well, and when we were looking at the training programs across Canada, okay, Quebec is definitely much further ahead than the rest of Canada. Okay, the cyclochrome training program, okay, is actually accredited with the Quebec Ministry of Education. Okay, now it's not a trade. Okay, but at least there's some sort of accreditation by the province there. The challenge that they face is they have to get that reaccredited every year, okay? Because, yeah, okay, there's no because they don't have they don't have the data, okay? Like how many people are hired, okay? Like all this stuff, okay? So you know we're every province, we're even Quebec, okay, is dealing with this lack of information and lack of coordination.
okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now, before we switch gears, Dave, in Ottawa, like to join the chat.
Oh, yeah, just a couple of things that has been said that I've been thinking about. The liability issue, I think, is huge in
Mhm.
terms of leveraging the need because I don't know how many times I've had, and I run a little shop, so I don't know how many times I've had a new bike come in from Canadian Tire that has had a serious issue, right? One in particular that basically had no brakes. So the store has a liability issue, right? Because now something could happen um, to that child, and next thing you know, well, there's a serious injury or death or whatnot,
Mhm.
and they're hiring teens to come in and assemble bikes that there's no regs, right? So there's no standardization.
Mhm.
So I think this is great. Um, but yeah, I mean, and as the industry evolves into more and more EV, electric bikes, then we start to see the bigger need, and now we're seeing e-bikes that are coming in that are unregulated. People have tampered with them,
Mhm.
and now they're going above. I think the industry standard across the country is probably around 32 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken, for speed limit, and we're seeing stuff that are going 40 and 50. So, and then in the end, it makes you wonder a couple things in relation to all this is that they're labeled as vehicles. They're labeled as vehicles by every provincial ministry of transport. So Transport Canada, in my opinion, needs to step in because
Mhm.
they are a vehicle under all provincial reg authorities that that need this standardization in terms of anybody that's going to touch them.
Yep.
And then oh, I lost my train of thought there. But anyways, so and in line with the feds and the work you're doing, Rob, and congratulations. I think it's great. You've certainly shared some awesome info so far, and look forward to to help move the needle along. I'm wondering if anybody knows, if Sam, if you know what the status in the end is of the Active Transportation Fund with Infrastructure Canada, if that ever got re-signed, if you will, or recommitted for another X amount of years, um, and if this project of yours here, Rob, has any, if there's anything in the fund that you could leverage. I
Yep.
don't know if you've looked into that. So
Um, we haven't looked, in the last federal budget, there was an announcement for a lot more funding for sector training, okay, which we feel we qualify for, right? Okay, so kind of, that bigger picture. We do go after funding. We've looked at funding, okay, for the Skills Canada is a good example, okay, big program, big funding for the skilled trades, okay, but we're not a skilled trade. Bike mechanics aren't, so you don't qualify. And this, when I was at the city, we were going after funding left, right, and center, trying to get funding, and we were turned down repeatedly because one, no data, okay, and no classification, okay, like bike mechanics don't exist officially.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of challenges to get over that first hump to start getting access to funding.
Yeah, I guess beyond that whole bigger part of your project, I guess I'm specifically more referring to any funding to help this initiative,
right?
Move along, especially in light of the knock deadline coming up, and your goals with the petition and whatnot.
Yep.
If there's anything there.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay.
I have one more friend here, Leah. Go ahead and jump in.
Hi, Leah's here too. I'm Becca Denley, Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. I had a question about whether or not you've reached out to specific groups in Canada that are trying to increase the interest in trades in general, and how we as a society honor the trades route. I referenced specifically living in Denmark a few years and really admiring that when kids were graduating after grade 9 and they graduate, and then they're introduced to, okay, well, these are your options. And it's similar to CEGEP in a way where you could go into a school that leads you to university, but you could also go into a school that leads you to your trades, like everything from mechanics to building homes and things like that. But there was a real acceptance in the education system to support that, and I think Canada needs that. And I support that, and I'm wondering who are those key people that are really trying to support that, because having those conversations with them in particular can bring your story with them.
Yep. No, and that's a very good point, and that's one of the reasons I'm so involved now in just the bike mechanics, okay, is it's a green skilled trade, okay? But to be honest with you, bike mechanics is not the only green skilled trade that has big challenges in Canada, okay? Solar technicians, exactly the same problem. Wind technicians, exactly the same problem. Ground source heat pumps, you can go on, okay? All these, which new technologies required skilled people working on them, okay? And there's no acknowledgement in Canada, which is absolutely crazy.
And another point I'll make, and this is like little seeds for you all, because this is also something I think about, is how the decarbonization in Denmark meant that people working on oil rigs were like, okay, I'm out of a job now, but they didn't just leave them for what do I do now? But they specifically put them through education programs to learn how to do wind turbine mechanic work, and they lifted up their people to do these new things. And up here we're seeing mines shutting down, and people like, okay, there you go, good luck, here's your try this training over here or this over here. But I think that the federal government and provincial territorial governments have this responsibility to really, I think education apart from food and housing, education is so important to support.
The Europeans have seemed to figure this out.
It's very important. So I'll leave it there, though.
I was going to say, it seems like the Europeans have figured this out. Okay, that the skilled trades in the green sector are really critical next step in the evolution of jobs. Okay. And the Danes, I've worked with the Danish government on a number of different projects. Okay, perhaps Denmark should annex Canada, right? Okay, that might help, right? Anyways, okay, it is a challenge, okay, that we're dealing with in Canada, and I think the more people talk about this, okay, the more important. And it's also building collaboration outside of just the bicycle industry, right? There's a whole clean tech, ecosystem out there. Okay. And every industry talks about the same need. Okay. But where's the building of the coalition of the green industries that the cycling industry should be engaged with at the same time? Because if you got, like 10 different, green occupations that need the same level of support, okay, then let's work together.
Well, on that note of your bold proposal of getting annexed by Denmark, we should thank you again, Rob, for this really well-researched presentation, and more importantly, the work that you're leading on this.